So I, like most of you, have this particular tech YouTuber I watch, the Prime Timeagen or something, I think. Yeah, I guess he used to work at Hulu or something. This video was really, really interesting, though. I've already watched it, I think, twice now, but I wanted to go through it with you guys because there's a lot of things Prime says about building with frameworks that I think we can learn a lot from, but I don't fully agree with the conclusion because I think there are important details he is missing as he discusses it. This video is going to be a little different than usual because we'll be going piece by piece through this admittedly quite short video, 4 minutes and 20 seconds, and I will likely be diagramming my thoughts. I have no idea how we're going to orchestrate this, but I still have to pay my team. Quick word from our sponsor, then we'll get right to it. If you're watching this video, you're probably a pretty good engineer. What about the engineers around you, though? Do you want to hire the best? Do you want to have a team full of people that are as talented as they could be? We all do, but it's getting harder and harder, especially as we get flooded with these terrible, useless AI resumes. That's why I partner with today's sponsor, G2I. These guys get it. They will make it way easier for you to hire the best engineers, and you'll know what you're getting as you go in. When I say these guys get it, I mean it. They run React Miami, which is my favorite React event. Sorry, ReactConf. Seriously, you should check out React Miami if you can go next year. It's super fun. They also help giant companies like Webflow and Meta with their hiring. So they're not just helping random small startups, but they will help yours if you're interested. What really makes these guys different is the pool of talent they have ready and available to go. We're talking 8,000 engineers that can start literally in under a week. You're not just reading a resume and hitting a checkbox. They have full remote video interviews that you don't even have to show up for, where they do the video interview and show you the results. You can even pitch your own questions that will be asked and get a video response back. So you actually get to know the human who you're going to be working with. And they can help hire pretty much anywhere, from US and Canada, Latin America, and even Europe. And it's not just full-time engineers either. You can have part-time contracts through this as well. When you start working with G2I, they'll form a Slack channel with you with almost immediate updates. These guys are on the ball. They're one of my most responsive sponsors. I know they'll be even more responsive with you guys. If you're trying to hire great engineers and get them shipping fast, it's hard to beat G2I. Their goal is 7 days from interview to the first pull request being filed, and I've seen them hit this. I think they will for you too. Check them out today at soydev.link/G2I. Let's hear what Prime said first and foremost.
And bro, why we move from PHP and jQuery to React to the client-side rendering when it comes to web development nowadays? We're trying to again to move everything to the server, Next.js, server actions, and SSR. I don't know, because life would be a tragedy if it wasn't a comedy. What do you want me to say? We're going to keep running this wheel. Honestly, in 2 years, people are going to say, my gosh, move everything to the client. And then we're going to do the client again. And then everyone's going to be like, no, let's move it to the server.
This one's particularly funny for me because I'm in the process of moving everything back to the client with T3 Chat as one of the biggest proponents of server components. So I feel it. This is going to be a fun one. Let's hear what he has to say a bit more first, because I agree with more than you probably expect, but the details are where the killers are.
Server, and then they're going to move it on the server again. No one's going to be happy. Can I tell you a secret to life? Why you see this kind of repetitive nature of thin client, thick client, and all this? It's actually really, really simple. First, you start building something. When you build this, it seems really nice. It seems really great. This new way of doing things, let's just call it jQueryous for now, is really awesome. So much better than what was before. You can actually do like CSS selectors with Sizzle. It's fantastic. So you start building and it gets great. But then you cross like 20,000 lines of code. And it just kind of sucks on the front end. So what do you do next? At some point, you get into this new library called Freeact. And Freeact, man, HTML, it's so good. It's so much better. Man, there's like life cycles. And then you go, oh, once it gets big, it gets really bad. And you're like, oh, why is this so bad? And so the next thing happens. And it's bad. And then the next thing happens, and when it gets big, it's bad. And then the next thing happens, it gets big and it gets bad. And like, you know what the secret is? Coding always kind of sucks. It's always hard. It's like eventually everything just sucks. And that's where the fun is just building the thing.
And here's where I need to jump in. First and foremost, I agree. Most things get bad at a certain size. When code bases get large, DX tends to go to shit. If we were to chart this, we have our green line. We'll say this green line is the amount of code, and we'll say this red line is the quality of experience. So the quality of experience might be pretty consistent for a while, but you'll hit a threshold where suddenly it starts to go down. And then you might hit another where it gets worse and worse until you've bottomed out and everybody on your team is waiting 5 minutes for HMR. Your build pipeline takes 2 hours to compile your JavaScript into other JavaScript, and you're questioning if you should quit and become a farmer. This is real. I'll just call it DX for developer experience. And here we'll say green is amount of code. This is effectively what Prime is saying, and I totally agree. Whenever you try something new, this is really, really crucial because when you're working on a code base that is many years old, you are inherently here. And when you're trying out something for the first time, you're starting here. If your first experience with React is in a code base that is here, you're going to hate it. And that's a sad reality is that React is so popular. A lot of people's first React experience is when the code base that they're working in is already so far gone that the experience can't be good. But if you're trying out something new like Svelte, all of the Svelte code in the world probably gets to like here max, just because the projects people use Svelte for are inherently smaller and they've optimized the hell out of how they're building them, and the teams working on those projects tend to be smaller too. There just aren't that many giant Svelte code bases. So even if you're hopping into an existing one, chances are the DX is going to feel much better simply because the size of the surface area you're covering is way smaller. But chances are you're starting here and slowly ramping here, and it takes a while before you start to feel the pain of the developer experience getting worse because you need a ton of code to get there. But this is only one aspect. It's only one dimension, so to speak, of this. We are just comparing DX here to amount of code. I want to compare this to something else because this is short selling, like significantly short selling, the benefits of a lot of these tools and technologies. Let's change this from amount of code to amount of functionality in our code. What I mean by this is think of like a blog. Most blogs have way less functionality than an app like Twitter does or an app like T3 Chat does. The amount of functionality that your code base provides its users is a very important metric to consider relative to the experience you have developing it. Just a heads up, here's where the hot takes are going to start. If this green line is the amount of functionality in the code base, let's compare this for different technologies. For vanilla HTML Ajax, I'd say it's something like this. The amount of functionality you get working with something like vanilla HTML and Ajax is limited effectively to Gmail. Gmail was one of the first really big, popular, successful Ajax apps. If you're not familiar with Ajax, it's asynchronous JavaScript and XML. It was the ability for the browser to request more data and update the page without having to load a new page. It was kind of the start of the web we know. Think about all the stuff I can do on this page without changing the URL. The URL will always be the same, but I can rule the world from here. Or scrolling through Twitter, it'll just be on the homepage, but you can do so much from there. The problem here is with vanilla HTML and Ajax, actually getting the data from the server, updating the HTML, and giving the user the result is easy for a short, quick example. But the more complex the app gets, the more relations there are between different elements on the page. Once you're at the point where there's a button on the bottom right that triggers something in the top left to update something on the center of the screen, fetching from these 4 different places, you have to create and manage all of those bindings and relationships yourself. The relationship between an element of HTML, some data from the server, and the JavaScript that does the triggering and the updating. You have to define that relationship yourself. And doing it with vanilla browser APIs was hell, which is why a wonderful technology named jQuery was invented. jQuery was so much better. I would argue that compared to like the vanilla HTML alternatives, it was an exponential increase in the capabilities of what your applications could do before you started hitting these DX walls. The important line to imagine here is how far can you go before you feel like shit using the thing, before the quality starts to dip? And if we look down, you'll see the vanilla HTML did not get you anywhere near as far as jQuery did. I know this is not real metrics, but hopefully it'll communicate the actual experience I and many have had using these tools and technologies. And to be clear, a big jQuery code base and a similarly sized React code base will probably provide a similarly bad developer experience if we're just comparing lines of code, but we're not. We're comparing the functionality that those code bases provide to their users. And if we look at React this way, you'll see how monumental a win it is. React lets you build significantly more complex applications with significantly less code It doesn't mean a big React code base is pleasant. In many ways, a big React code base is even harder to work in than certain jQuery ones, especially depending on which libraries you chose and how it's architected. But React makes building relationships in the functionality in your application significantly easier, and it does that by modeling those relationships differently. They model it top down with the state, and that modeling makes a ton of stuff way easier. It also, and this is probably the most controversial thing I'll say, it makes the maintainability of larger code bases significantly better too. It is inarguable that it is easier to build a complex web application with React than it was with jQuery. You could make an argument against the maintainability of a larger code base and the maintainability of an experience with a shitload of React devs working in the same project together. But the reality is a code base with 1,000 devs using jQuery, where they're all changing where the state's coming from, how the UI updates, all that, the amount of hell you're going to run into, the amount of random problems you'll hit constantly is absurd. Because you don't know when you document or like $get element by ID, some element, you don't know this element exists. You can check once you've gotten it if it does or not, but you're not controlling it rendering. This element exists because it was in the HTML already, or some other jQuery code put it there. So if you're writing code that fetches data, like we $.ajax/API/userinfo, then now you have to update wherever we want this code to go. We'll call this, I don't know, var user pro element equals whatever. We'll change this over to the code mode. Cool. Now we have our Ajax call, and this guy will user pro element dot inner HTML equals div data dot username. You get the idea. This is super pseudocodey. I haven't written jQuery in so long, it's going to get roasted. I don't care. Yeah, okay. This was dot callback, not then, whatever. You get the idea. If these things are right above each other like this, and you know that this element always exists, fine. But as soon as any variability exists here, as soon as these are in different files, as soon as some element is rendered by something else, as soon as this call gets fired in a different place that it might not belong, as soon as this gets put in a button somewhere, good luck, have fun, especially if you have a lot of people contributing to this code base. This is just as good as React for something like a counter or a basic table that shows a bunch of data. But as soon as the complexity of what users expect from the app goes up, as soon as the complexity of the team goes up, as soon as the complexity of the expectations of this code base go up, this model falls apart. And the thing React allowed is for us to get way further before we hit that DX cliff. Instead of 2 developers and a month of work putting us in hell, 10 developers and 3 months of work can now put us in hell. But in those 3 months with those 10 devs, you can build like 50 times the functionality. And the problems are also more solvable too, because we've worked together as an ecosystem to identify as many of these problems and solve them. Funny enough, server components are one of those things. The goal with server components is specifically to reduce the complexity both for the browser and for the developers in loading data properly to our users. Doing good data loading patterns in a single page app is not easy, especially if you're rolling it yourself. You'll very quickly fall into waterfall hell where you're doing a request, it renders something, it does another request, and it renders something. Not good. The goal of server components is to reduce the likelihood that you get yourself into one of those scenarios, thereby reducing the complexity necessary to achieve a certain level of functionality. And that's another way to view this. If we have a certain amount of functionality we want our users to have access to. So let's put this arbitrary bar here for our app. We'll call it, I don't know, T5 chat. No idea where I came up with that name. Let's say this axis here is code base complexity. And this arrow up here, or this direction here, is code base functionality. If we wanted to build something like T5 chat, and we wanted to do this in jQuery, the amount of complexity necessary to get there is not pleasant. So this is jQuery's complexity. For jQuery to get to this level of functionality, you have to build something pretty complex. For React, though, it's less bad. And this is the most important thing I want to draw the distinction of. You could vaguely map code base complexity to lines of code. I'll even do that to entertain the point Prime was making. The reality is, if we look at a line here, both jQuery and React are probably similarly miserable to maintain at this level of complexity. The difference is how much functionality do you get at that level of complexity. And with React, you get a hell of a lot more. Since React allows for much more complex things to be modeled in a much similar and more maintainable way, something as complex as T3 chat and jQuery could be something as complex as Figma in React. Not literally, but you get the point. The level of complexity you can build into your apps and the level of functionality you can build into your apps before you hit these complex walls is significantly higher. And that shows in the maintainability too. I've worked in a lot of big code bases that are using a lot of different tech. And as hellish as a big React code base is, it's not as hellish as a bigger jQuery one. And the functionality you get out of that code base is way higher. And this is probably where the biggest change has happened. When jQuery was popular, user expectations were much lower. The expectation wasn't the world's fastest AI chat app. The expectation was slightly slower Outlook alternative. And when this is what people were expecting, jQuery was a monumental win, because previously that would have taken like the same level of complexity that something like T5 chat would without jQuery. React makes it comically easy though. Now there are teams of 2 or 3 people building Gmail alternatives that feel just as good as Gmail, because that's all it takes now. If you had a code base the size of Gmail's, React would suck to work with, the same way that Gmail's code base sucks to work with. But it's unfair to paint all of the progress in new tools and solutions as complexity we haven't hit yet, when you don't also acknowledge the fact that the functionality we can provide at a certain level of complexity is so much higher. And we also haven't talked about the most important addition here, which is TypeScript. Hell, I would even say pre-TypeScript, the benefits of jQuery versus React are not as big. I would say React may be here just by itself, but React plus TypeScript and the relationships that now let you confidently change code in one place and know the other places it breaks. Oh, God, the amount of crazy I've done more crazy refactors in any given month since TypeScript was a prominent thing in the code bases I worked in than I did in my entire life before then, simply because TypeScript makes you much more capable of making a scary change without making sure every single element somewhere that uses this ID is rendered on the page before you try and write to it. Yeah, the level of complexity that I can own before my brain breaks has gone up. The amount of functionality my apps can provide per line of code has gone up. The expectations of users has gone up. The quality of the tools we use to pull this all together has gone up. Everything is improving. Sure, we're going from server to client to server back and forth. We're looking at PHP and learning from it 20 years later. If only we just stuck with it. No, stop all of this. We need to be able to acknowledge when certain solutions go too far and we need to walk back a bit without saying that we were entirely wrong and that there is no benefit of these new tools. We need to be able to say that a big React code base is bad in ways similar to a big jQuery code base without pretending that those two code bases did the same thing and met expectations the same way. With expectations rising, with the quality of applications we use in the browser rising, with the size of the average team working on these things going up, and now finally in layoff AI world starting to go down a bit, you have to talk about all those things as well. And as much as I agree with Prime, and I absolutely agree that a large, complex code base sucks regardless of the tools you're using, you need to acknowledge the fact that a company the size of Netflix would not have had a good time if they had built that on jQuery instead. The functionality and the user's expectations are way more important than any quality of developer experience. And React won for those reasons. It lets us ship what our users expect at scales that were previously unimaginable without fully ruining our lives, only kind of. I think I made my point here. Chat, how are you guys feeling? Am I insane or... Yeah, I agree with this statement, Dogpaw Hat. New tech enables reinvention of old businesses way easier every 10 years. Funny enough, I heard this quote first from Luke from LTT, and he couldn't find the original source. I've been hunting for it. Any piece of software gets around 3x easier to build every 3 years. It's a really rough estimate, and I'm sure AI has accelerated this in ways we could never have imagined. But I absolutely believe it. Me and my team were able to build a very compelling Zoom alternative with Ping, like a full-on Zoom clone, effectively, for creators to do good, high-quality HD live collaborations. I had the working version of this myself in a week. Years before, even like a year or two prior, that would have been unimaginable. And I did this before AI tools, too. These new tools allow for things to be so much easier to build that the result's inherently less complexity per feature, less complexity per thing the app can do. And with that, apps can be more complex too. And that's awesome. That's a really good thing. The fact that it's so easy to build things that we build today, that a small team can build stuff that used to take 30 engineers, that's not because React is bad. And to pretend that is absolutely delusional. That's because these tools are showing actual meaningful wins. But we need to be able to talk about the move from client to server. We need to be able to talk about complex code bases sucking to work in. We need to be able to talk about all of these things without blindly pretending it was just as good back in the day. It wasn't. The tools are keeping up with user expectations, and user expectations are keeping up with the wins we get from those tools. As it gets easier to build great software, users expect better and better software. This all needs to keep moving up. We're not on a pendulum. We're on a spiral staircase headed towards better software. And we need to be fighting together to prevent the AI slop from putting us in a buggy, hellish landscape. And if we can't acknowledge that tools like React are a win, then the AI bots that are using them to take over the world with crap software are going to win instead. You got to pick a side. And as sad as it is, jQuery is not the side you want to be on right now. I have a lot of other videos talking about things like jQuery and HTMX and where I think they fit in a modern landscape and ecosystem. I just wish people would stop pretending those tools were good enough for everything. Like when I'm building the sync engine for T3 chat, I don't pretend that serverless works great for that. I know that if I want to build that properly with live updating when things change, that's going to require a dedicated server and WebSockets. The way I prefer to build doesn't map well to that. I am shortcutting around it in the ways that I can that make sense, but that's a shortcoming of the way I choose to build. I wish more of these anti-JS people would acknowledge the fact that the same way I know serverless doesn't work for certain complex use cases, jQuery works even worse. And if you think throwing a WebSocket in a serverless environment is bad, wait till you try using jQuery to build a Twitter clone. You'll understand pain at that point. Also think about the functionality and the expectations of users, because if we don't work together to make the tooling better for the problems that we want solved, the AI will win, and we'll be sitting in a corner playing with our Emacs configs, pretending it matters. And we don't want that. We really don't want that. Video killed the radio star, and AI is going to slaughter the jQuery fanboy into teeny tiny pieces. Please be responsible when we talk about these things. Let me know what you guys think about this. I know it's a different take for me and a very different structure of video. I'm curious how y'all feel. And until next time, peace nerds.